For most people, the Roaring Twenties conjures up images of flapper dresses, sparkles, and bootleggers wearing fedoras. But the 1920s had a darker side. The anticipation for Resident Evil Village is at a fever pitch. After an extended demo period and a reveal of some of the creepiest creatures from the game, players are ready for Capcom's latest installation of the franchise. In fact, they're so ready that they've gone ahead and created some creepy mods. Nexus Mods, the internet's destination for all things mod-related, has a growing Resident Evil Village page. Some existing mods seem peculiar, like one that puts Barney, of Big Purple Dinosaur fame, into the game as an enemy. Throughout the decade, there were murders, explosions, kidnappings, and disappearances, many of which were never solved. There are many reasons why mysteries in the 1920s may have remained unsolved. Fighting off a horde of smiling anthropomorphic dinosaurs is a true nightmare, but it's nothing compared to the weirdness of some Resident Evil Village mods. Somehow, modders created demented mashups and reskins to scare even the most stoic Raccoon City veterans. Whether gamers are looking for a more intimidating version of Lady Dimitrescu or scarier weaponry for her daughters, modders have already begun to experiment with what's possible in Resident Evil Village. Considering how violent the game is purported to be, these mods can only serve to make the village and its surroundings even more terrifying. Lady Dimitrescu's daughters can brandish swords sometimes, enemies just don't pack enough punch, and players are left trying to figure out what could make their foes more intimidating. It was significantly easier to leave town and disappear after committing a crime, and police didn't have as many resources then as they do now. Some mysteries may have even been deliberately left that way simply because they could be. Even 100 years later, many of these mysteries remain, well, mysterious, since any possibility of solving them faded away decades ago. But some of the strangest mysteries from the Roaring Twenties held their grip on people from the moment they arose. And while most will probably remain unsolved forever, it's worth taking a look back to see some of the most mysterious events of the Roaring Twenties. What really happened to Virginia Rapp? The death of Virginia Rapp and the subsequent trial of actor Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was one of the biggest scandals of the 1920s. Someone's done that work for Resident Evil Village fans by giving everyone a sword. J-Tagius Kittis, or J-Tag on Nexus Mods, crafted a mod that does exactly what it promises. Swords for Daughters allows Lady Dimitrescu's dark, brooding children to carry swords, which somehow seems more menacing than the scythes developers originally gave them. The mod description claims that it will replace the sickle for the daughters with the longswords used by the Lycans. While scythes and sickles have agricultural uses in the real world, swords are just, well, swords. They're weapons and weapons only, which make the longsword-wielding daughters all the more intimidating. Apparently, it wasn't enough for the Lycans to carry them. In the original conception of Resident Evil Village, Lady Dimitrescu's castle held over 100 daughters, all of whom were witches ready to attack Ethan Winters. And although Arbuckle was found not guilty, it's still unclear exactly what led to Rapp's death. Now, imagine 100 daughters with swords. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Rapp and Arbuckle were at a party together at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco on September 5, 1921. Ethan might reconsider coming to this village, just like he may have regretted going after Mia at the Baker estate. Lady Dimitrescu gets glasses Ultra Gamera. A Nexus Mods modder uploaded mommy glasses with a simple description of self-explanatory. It's true that this mod needs little introduction, because it does what it promises. Mommy Glasses adds a stylish pair of red sunglasses to the game's infamous antagonist, Lady Alcina Dimitrescu. While it's not clear what the glasses add to the game, it's obvious that they're adding something for somebody. Arbuckle claimed that after having a few drinks with Rapp, she became hysterical, and he soon found her vomiting in the bathroom. And when her condition didn't improve for 3 days, she was finally taken to the hospital. With almost 1,000 views and 24 unique downloads at the time of publishing, Lady Dimitrescu's glasses are turning heads. It's worth noting that anything Lady Dimitrescu does will grab attention, though. She's the lady that launched 1,000 memes, and she's taller than anyone ever expected. Fans that want even more style for Lady Dimitrescu can now outfit her with glasses fit for a queen, or at least the lady of a wine empire.
There, doctors discovered that she had a ruptured bladder and peritonitis, which led to her death on September 9. At the hospital, Rapp's friend Bambina Maud Dalemont claimed that Arbuckle had raped Rapp and caused her death, writes All That's Interesting. But the BBC also notes that before being taken to the hospital, Rapp also claimed, "He did this to me." As a result, both Rapp and Arbuckle were disparaged in the papers, which wrote either about Arbuckle's weight causing the ruptured bladder during the alleged rape or blamed Rapp's potential venereal diseases. According to urology case reports, a ruptured bladder most commonly occurs due to abdominal trauma but can occur if there's chronic inflammation. For fans that want to feel like their mom is ready to chase them through the house to argue about something, Mommy Glasses fits the bill. The Merchant gets a facelift. Crossovers are a hallowed part of gaming history, even if they don't always work out. One modder took it upon themselves to create a crossover no one was asking for, but everyone needed. Pudge the Butcher, a character from Defense of the Ancients, more commonly known as Dota, is a large, lumbering menace who carves up dead bodies. And while it's suspected that Rapp suffered from cystitis, which may have led to the ruptured bladder, no one will ever know exactly what happened to Virginia Rapp. How did Thomas H? He may not have much in common with the Duke, who aids players by selling them weapons and items, but there is at least a passing resemblance. Weewills's mod, Pudge Mask for the Duke, gives the Duke a new face, but doesn't change his overall body or attitude. Ince really die? Thomas H. Ince was one of the most influential figures in the silent film industry during the beginning of the 20th century, but the circumstances of his death remain unknown to this day, with some even claiming that newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst was responsible. On November 16, 1924, Ince boarded the Oneida, Hearst's yacht, for a weekend excursion for Ince's 42nd birthday. According to the Vintage News, in addition to finalizing negotiations over Hearst having access to Ince's film studio. Still, the result is unsettling. The mask might help counter a troubling aspect of the Duke's character design that's already received some buzz online. Many gamers, as well as scholars, pointed out that the Duke's character design employs fatphobic stereotypes. The Pudge mask adds another layer to the design, and makes the Duke creepier without resorting to body shaming. Lady Dimitrescu updates her interior design. Every gigantic, creepy castle needs a facelift sometimes. And what better way to decorate them with statues of yourself? Replace the armors with Alcina Dimitrescu. By Rack turns every suit of armor in Castle Dimitrescu into a lovely statue of the lady of the house. You might be wondering why the switch in decor comes across as creepy. There were a number of other celebrities on the yacht, including Charlie Chaplin, Marion Davies, and Luella Parsons. It's important to note that the statues of Lady Dimitrescu aren't just any old pose. No. These statues depict Alcina in her full glory, claws outstretched and head lifted proudly. Seeing the menacing statues should remind you that Lady Dimitrescu could be lurking around any corner. A dinner was held for Ince's birthday, but Ince allegedly left the dinner early due to stomach cramps. In fact, it's easy to mistake one of the towering statues for the real thing. If jumping with surprise every time you open a door is your thing, this mod is worth the price of free admission. Of course, statues aren't the most terrifying thing the modding community has in store. Lady Theodora creeps into uncanny territory. True horror often hinges on Julia Kristova's theory of the abject, which focuses on the tension between desiring something and fearing it. When the cramps worsened, Ince left the yacht and traveled back to Los Angeles with his family. 3 days later, on November 19, Ince was dead, and the doctor put down the cause of death as heart failure. But according to the New England Historical Society, soon rumors spread that Ince had been shot on Hearst's yacht after Hearst caught Chaplin and Davies together and hit Ince by mistake in an attempt to shoot Chaplin. Nothing describes the division between love and fear like Lady Dimitrescu's voluptuous body with the face of Thomas the Tank Engine poised on top. The description of Count Theodora, a mod by Crazy Potato, claims that the program replaces Lady Dimitrescu with Thomas from the popular children's television show of the same name. And while it's unclear exactly what led to Ince's death, there's evidence that Hearst tried to silence Ince's wife with a trust fund and Luella Parsons with a lifetime job. But since Ince's body ended up being cremated incredibly quickly, it's impossible to confirm what actually happened.
Who kidnapped Casper Holstein? Casper Holstein was one of the richest mobsters in New York City during the 1920s. But it's possible that his wealth, or even his philanthropy towards the black community, made him a target for one of the unsolved kidnappings of the 1920s. After working on Wall Street and studying the illegal lotteries played in New York City, Casper Holstein started his own lottery, known as Bolito, and by the mid-1920s was earning more than $2 million, according to BlackPast. But then in September 1928, Holstein was kidnapped by 5 white men who, according to the New York Times, demanded a ransom of $50,000. In reality, it does much more than that. It should go without saying, but tank engines should not have attractive human bodies, nor should attractive human bodies have the heads of tank engines. The contrast between Lady Dimitrescu's model and Thomas the Tank Engine's unblinking, blank face feels jarring, and there's something doubly disturbing about the train-faced tall lady walking slowly towards the player, calm and ready to kill. Video footage of the mod in action only emphasizes how surreal it is. Holstein ended up being released after 3 days, but he repeatedly insisted that the ransom wasn't paid. And the Saint Count Theodora even takes a shotgun to the face and keeps on moving. The Resident Evil Village modding community will likely expand after the game releases on May 7, but until then there are plenty of strange, terrifying mods to keep players happy until then. Ricardo Milos dances into Resident Evil 8. Ricardo Milos, a Brazilian model who went viral in the early 2010s, is the meme that just won't quit. Now, you can make Resident Evil Village even more bewildering by transforming the game's typical monsters into the dancing model. Modder Marcos RC released the Ricardo Milos mod for his Patreon subscribers, so it's behind a bit of a paywall, but that doesn't make it any less scary. Thomas Source writes that after being released, Holstein refused to identify his kidnappers, even when it appeared as though the police had caught them. As a result, nobody was arrested in connection with the kidnapping and no one knows exactly what happened. Face2Face Africa also writes that Holstein told reporters that he could in fact identify the kidnappers, but he kept quiet due to business reasons. However, one of the main rumors that circulated claimed that another mobster, Dutch Schultz, set up the kidnapping in order to take over the gambling scene in Harlem. But at the end of the day, no one but Holstein knows exactly what happened over those 3 days of being taken hostage. Who murdered Pancho Villa? Francisco Pancho Villa was a key figure of the Mexican Revolution, but by 1920, he'd largely retreated out of politics and guerrilla warfare. According to ThoughtCo, after the assassination of Venustiano Carranza in 1920 by agents of Alvaro Obregón, Villa negotiated a retirement that required him to stay out of national politics. Villa retired to his 163,000-acre hacienda at Canatillo and rarely left over the next 3 years. And whenever he did, 50 armed bodyguards came with him, all of whom were fanatically loyal. But then in July 1923, Villa set off to the town of Parral with only a few of the armed bodyguards he typically traveled with. There, he attended the baptism of and was named godfather to the child of one of his men. On July 20, Villa was driving back to Canatillo, but as he drove down a street in Parral, he was assassinated almost instantly as someone shot at him from a house they'd been waiting in for almost 3 months. The many Milos have a glistening quality to them, like each model has been greased up and is ready to slip through the dungeons under Castle Dimitrescu. El Paso Times reported that the assassins were deserters from Villa's personal bodyguard, but is that really all they were? The assassins never ended up being caught, and it was clear that the killing was well organized, especially since telegraph lines out of Parral had been cut. Although Jesus Salas Barraza soon claimed responsibility for the assassination, this allowed higher officials to evade responsibility, even though the plot likely went all the way up to President Obregón, who sabotaged B. In typical Ricardo Milos style. The writhing models wear American flag bikini bottoms and a red bandana. One commenter jokingly said that Lady Dimitrescu had met her match, while another called it scary and funny at the same time. Whether it's meant to be funny or not, the mod is certainly uncanny and overwhelming. Nothing says terror like a group of oiled-up models in your face. Lady Dimitrescu's Daughters Get Cleaned Up mods can do a variety of things, and some of the stranger ones may speak to the curiosities of certain players. One such curiosity involves Lady Dimitrescu's daughters, who appear in Resident Evil Village as blood-smeared, fly-covered monsters.
Underneath all that blood and grime, though, some players saw lovely character models, so the girls got spruced up in a mod from Ultra Gamera. Ultra Gamera's mod removes all the blood from Daniela, Bella, and Cassandra, but doesn't manage to get rid of the flies, unfortunately. The result is impressive. The girls are cleaned up and, for the first time, players can see their full faces without the jammy gore. One commenter joked that Lady Dimitrescu must not have taught her daughters any manners, and that the program cleans up their faces perfectly. Ultra Gamera explained in their original post that players can still see a ghostly outline of where the blood once stained the daughters' faces, but it's difficult to see unless you're really looking for it. Delays plain? Before B. The modder hinted that they may improve on their work after the release of the full game. This gun is Bananas, Banana Gun and Spoon Knife, a Resident Evil Village mod from SteveBG23, brings a healthy dose of potassium to Castle Dimitrescu. The mod turns Ethan Winter's gun into, you guess it, a banana, with the protagonist's knife becoming a spoon. The mods page explains that SteveBG23 originally created a similar mod for Resident Evil 2, and that they feel excited to bring a new version of the banana gun to the latest installment of the series. While the humorous tone of the banana gun might not fit with the dreary village Ethan Winters finds himself in, it provides some much-needed levity to the dark overtones of the world. It's hard to be scared or angry when there's a banana in your hand. Banana guns are a favorite in the modding community, with yellow fruits getting added to a variety of games, including Fallout 4 and Boneworks. The banana gun doesn't necessarily change how weapons work in Resident Evil Village, but it does alter players' perceptions of the horrific events unfolding on-screen. Lady Dimitrescu gets a haircut. Lady Dimitrescu is already beautiful and adored by fans all over, but one mod gives her a fierce new look. LV Gaming created this Patreon-exclusive mod, demonstrating the giant, Sinead O'Connor-esque Lady D in a YouTube video. The mod delivers on its titular promise. DeLay was an aerial stuntman, he was a racecar driver. But before long, he'd taken his daredevil skills to the skies and created his own company to perform aerial stunts for motion pictures, according to Aviators in early Hollywood. DeLay was no stranger to danger, and during his racing days he'd already experienced broken ribs, arms, and collarbones. But then, in 1923, DeLay's luck seemed to run out. According to FamPeople, on July 4, 1923, DeLay was performing for a crowd at Ocean Park with R.I. bald-head Lady Dimitrescu, takes the tall villain's hair off of her model, leaving behind a shiny, smooth hairline. The video features a couple of minutes of footage of Lady Dimitrescu chasing Ethan Winters around the castle, swiping at him with her claws. Some commenters thought the mod didn't go far enough, and asked for additional bikini modes for the harsh mistress of Castle Dimitrescu. Another fan just seemed shocked at the incredible speed with which developers have managed to produce mods. Short, president of S&D Corporation, as his passenger. The performance seemed to be going fine, but then in the middle of a loop-the-loop the wings of his plane folded back, causing the plane to crash down nose first. Resident Evil Village hasn't even been released yet, and already there are so many mods to choose from. Perhaps that's the true terror, here. The plane soon burst into flames, and although DeLay and Short were pulled out of the wreck, neither survived the crash. Upon further inspection, it was found that the pins in the airplane's wings were 3/8 of an inch, rather than the standard 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch. This meant that the wings were tampered with and that the crash was the result of sabotage. To this day no one knows who was responsible for DeLay's murder. However, just a few days before the crash, someone reportedly shot at DeLay in Clover Field, so the sabotaged plane was clearly just another attempt to finish the job. Who blew up Peter Varigin? Although Peter Vasilovich Varigin didn't arrive in Canada with the 7,500 Doukhobors that immigrated in 1899, he was seen as a leader of the Doukhobor community once he joined them after being released from exile. According to the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, upon arriving in Canada in 1902, Varigin settled near the existing Doukhobor communities and created a village named Varigin in Saskatchewan. Taking up the role as spiritual leader, Varigin also encouraged his followers to register for their 2,700 homesteads, but to hold the land collectively. But not everyone was pleased with Varigin. Minister of the Interior Frank Oliver sought to undo the Doukhobors' collective ownership in an attempt to make more land available.
Those who saw their sons sent off to World War I while the Doukhobors avoided conscription with their pacifism resented the community. And among the Doukhobors themselves, there were at least 3 dissident movements, ranging from independents, who encouraged private accumulation, to the Sons of Freedom, who feared an abandonment of true Doukhobor principles, according to Canada's history. Varigin's life was cut short on October 29, 1924, when he was killed by a train explosion on the Kettle Valley Line on the Canadian Pacific Railway in British Columbia. 8 others were also killed in the explosion. But to this day, no one knows if the explosion was a tragic accident or if it was a deliberate assassination. And according to Canadian Mysteries, no one ever ended up being charged. The unsolved Milleflores massacre during the 1920s, the Purple Gang held a firm grip on the bootlegging industry in Detroit. But their legacy came from more than just bootlegging. During their reign, the Purple Gang is thought to have been responsible for hundreds of gang-related murders, rivaled only by Murder Inc. and Al Capone's crew. But some of their killings, like the Miraflores massacre, remain unsolved to this day. According to the Purple Gang blog, the Miraflores massacre is thought to have originated with the murder of Johnny Reed in 1921. Reed was one of the biggest distributors for the Purple Gang, and so the gang decided to retaliate. However, it's unclear why the retaliation would have taken another 6 years to plan. But on March 28, 1927, it's believed the Purple Gang lured Frank Wright and 2 other men whom they thought were responsible for Reed's murder into the Miraflores apartments in Detroit. There, the 3 men were allegedly mowed down by the Purple Gang in what became known as the first machine gun slaying in state history, according to the Gangster Report. The apartment where the murder took place was leased by Eddie Fletcher and Abe Axler, both members of the Purple Gang. But in the end, nobody ended up being charged with the crime. Who was responsible for the Wall Street bombing of 1920? Although Italian anarchists were blamed for the Wall Street bombing of 1920, no one was ever convicted for the bombing. One would think that an attack on the burgeoning financial capital of the United States would warrant an intense investigation, but within 20 years even the FBI had given up. On the morning of September 16, 1920, witnesses claimed that they saw a wagon park outside J.P. Morgan and Company Bank and the driver left the wagon unattended, according to Terrorism on American Soil. And then, 1 minute after noon, a massive explosion rocked the area, shattering windows across a half-mile radius, writes the street. Up to 300 people were injured and at least 40 people were killed, largely due to the 500 pounds of shrapnel that was packed along with the explosive. But the next day, the New York Stock Exchange building was back up and running and sheets were used to cover up the horrors left over from the day before. The American anarchist fighters were blamed due to the leaflets found near the explosion site, according to the FBI, but although many anarchists were picked up during the Palmer raids, no one was ever charged in connection with the 1920 Wall Street bombing. Damn Interesting also writes that after the bombing, speaking out against Wall Street was seen as being anti-patriotic. So was it all just a ploy to create compassion for capitalism? Who's responsible for the Lava Lake murders? Known as the Lava Lake murders, the murders of Ed Nichols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris was one of the most gruesome murders Oregon witnessed during the 1920s. And although police had a main suspect, insufficient evidence meant that the crime remains officially unsolved to this day. Nichols, Wilson, and Morris were found by family members in April 1924, near their isolated cabin in Little Lava Lake, where they lived and worked as trappers during the winter months, according to the Source Weekly. The last that anyone had seen or heard from the men was around January 15, so by April the families became worried and ventured out to the cabin. But Mental Floss writes that the cabin was abandoned and it looked as though no one had been in the cabin for at least 2 months. And in the nearby storage shed, they also found a blood-stained hammer. Before long, they discovered the bodies of the 3 men in what looked like a hole in the ice that had been cut in the ice and had refrozen. All 3 had gunshot wounds, likely from a shotgun blast. After hearing that a former Elk Lake Lodge employee named Charles Kimsey had threatened one of the trappers, a $1,000 reward was offered for Kimsey's capture. But even with the reward, it took almost 5 years to find Kimsey, and in the end, no one was able to prove that Kimsey was responsible.
Who robbed Hartzell Bank? Also known as one of the most brazen bank robberies in the history of Alabama, the perpetrators of the 1926 robbery of the Bank of Hartzell were never caught, at least in regards to that particular robbery. Some of the suspects ended up being charged and convicted for other crimes later down the line, but the robbery of Hartzell Bank remains an unsolved mystery. According to the Hartzell Chamber of Commerce, the Great Hartzell Bank robbery occurred in the early hours of March 15, 1926, when between 5 to 15 men came into town shortly after midnight to loot the bank. Telephone cables were cut, leaving the town of Hartzell unable to contact the outside world, and with 8 blasts of nitroglycerin, the safe in the Bank of Hartzell was blown open. Roughly $15,000 in cash, gold, and silver was taken, worth approximately $230,000 in 2021. But according to the Hartzell Inquirer, since the bank was insured, they suffered no losses. If anything, it seemed as though the bank enjoyed more business and depositors than it had before the robbery. Out of the 15 men believed to have been involved in the robbery, 6 were investigated but no arrests were ever made, and they were all eventually released. And while some of those 6 were later caught on other charges, no one ever figured out exactly who was responsible for the 1926 robbery of the Bank of Hartzell. What happened to Glenn and Bessie Hyde? When Glenn and Bessie Hyde set out for their extended honeymoon in 1928, nobody knew that they'd never be heard from again. According to Inside the Simulation, Glenn and Bessie Hyde had set out for a trip down the rapids in the Colorado and Green Rivers and were halfway through their travels when they left the Kolb family on November 19, 1928. But when nobody heard from the Hydes after a few weeks, a search party was organized. Adventure Journal writes that the Hydes' boat was found on December 20, but there was no indication that the boat had been overturned, and all of their supplies and food were still strapped into the boat. Meanwhile, it appeared as though the couple had simply vanished into thin air. It was assumed that the two of them had drowned, but no bodies ever turned up either. Then, almost 50 years later, an old woman named Georgie Clark claimed that she was the real Bessie Hyde, and that she was responsible for killing Glenn. History Collection writes that Clark later denied everything when asked again, but when she died, some of her friends decided to look in her house for clues. There, they found a birth certificate with the name Bessie DeRoss, a pistol, and a marriage certificate of Bessie and Glenn Hyde. And yet none of Clark's younger photos looked anything like Bessie, leaving the story even stranger than when it started. Where did Agatha Christie go? It only seems fair that one of the most acclaimed mystery writers would be involved in a mind-boggling mystery of her own. On December 3, 1926, mystery writer Agatha Christie left her home in Sunningdale, Berkshire after arguing with her husband, Archibald Christie. All That's Interesting writes that Christie wrote a note for her secretary saying that she wouldn't be coming home that night, and left her house with a briefcase, taking the family's car. What happened over the next 11 days is something that only Christie knows, reminiscent of a Breaking Bad fugue state. According to Novel Suspects, Archie reported Christie missing the next day, and soon her car was found abandoned with her clothes and driver's license left inside. Police immediately began to question Archie, who was the last person to see Christie alive, and tried to pressure him into confessing while they continued to search for her. But then, all of a sudden, Christie was spotted alive and well in a Yorkshire spa, which is where her brother-in-law told the police she might be. But for some reason, she was registered under the name Nancy Neal. And upon being found, Christie claimed that she had amnesia and was suffering from the most complete loss of memory, a claim she maintained even in her own memoir. Was it a fugue state? Or was Christie just tired of her cheating husband? This is one mystery that Agatha Christie took to her grave.